Well, a very good morning to you all, community builders. Apologies for starting a few minutes late. We just wanted to test the system and make sure everything is in order. You'll see on the side of your screen a little chat functionality. Hello, Di from Horsham. Hello, Alison. Where are you joining us from today? My name's Lindsay Douglas and hello, Robin from Billawheeler. Hi, Narelle. Welcome, Julia. Welcome to you all. Oh, we've got New South Wales DPI joining us. Fantastic. San Diego. Hello, Susie. Welcome. Alice from Womberal. Andrew from East Gippsland. Welcome to you all. Tell us where you are today and tell us what the weather's like where you're joining us from across Australia. We've got a wonderful session in store for you today. So I am going to pop up on your screen right now a little test just so that you can make sure your audio's working. Check your systems. Here we go. Share it now. If you just want to check that your audio's working, hit that little test button so that we can make sure everything is working as it should. And you'll notice on the screen I've got a list of the desktop and mobile devices that we are most compatible here with on the Demio system. It's a fantastic system, but invariably one or two people each week say, my audio doesn't work or I've only got audio. So if it's not working for you, hit the test now, and worst case scenario, we video all of this and send it to you within about an hour of the session concluding. So you will get information. God, we've got a fantastic group with us today. Gillian from Linfield, Marilyn from Nundle, Neil and Veronica from Mangrove Mountain, Sarah from Port Macquarie. Welcome to you all. Not surprising we've got such a great attendance today because we've got a fantastic topic and we're very lucky to have a wonderful speaker joining us today. Hi, Grant from Manly. Well, good morning to you all, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our 7th webinar in the Community Builders series. As I said before, my name is Lindsay Douglas. I will be your Rural Aid host this morning, and we are just letting everyone doing a final test of their system at the moment. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, Rural Aid gives you a big warm welcome. This is the Community Builders series, and it is all about supporting small towns in rural and remote Australia. It was born, of course, as many things have been, from the coronavirus pandemic and making sure that we were informing our audiences of what they can be doing to prepare for a post-COVID world. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners on whose land we meet today, recognising traditional owners Australia-wide for their continuous connection to the land. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Well, these are weekly run free webinars, so if you're enjoying it and you think there's someone else in your organisation or your town or one of your community groups that would benefit from attending, please let us know about them. We'll send them an invitation and we can also send you the videos from the previous sessions. We started running these in early May and we're running them through till early July. And it's all about rebuilding resilience, bringing fresh ideas to help support your community. So we've had wonderful anecdotes from thriving communities with great economies. We've had really interesting stories from community and business leaders. And we've covered topics from long-term viability to being resilient, to discovering and fostering leadership, defining and mapping your community assets. We talked about how often communities work on mapping their community deficits, their community needs. What do we need? What do we not have? Rather than mapping what they do have and the IP that exists in their community today. We talked about tourism initiatives, available grants and how to access them and so much more. I'd like to thank our wonderful sponsors, Bushels. They get behind us every week. They've been great supporters of this community endeavour. And as I mentioned before, don't feel like you've got to furiously take notes because we will be recording all of this. We'll send you heaps of handouts and data and we'll send you the pack as well that you'll see in a moment's time. I'd like personally to thank the wonderful team at Bank of Ideas. If you haven't heard Peter Kenyon speak before, you are absolutely in for a treat. This man is a huge supporter of communities and he's helped over 2,000 of them with their recovery, their resilience and their rebuilding as well. Now, early on, we discovered that a lot of you would like to connect. Hello, Marilyn from Mystery Bay, that a lot of you would like to connect and share your ideas, concerns, challenges, things that have worked in your community. So we've set up a Facebook group, and I'm just going to pop onto the screen now the link to join that. So if you want to join our Community Builders Facebook group, we are putting all sorts of resources, videos, questionnaires, sharing ideas in that space, and it's been really popular. So you're very welcome to join us at the Rural Aid Community Builders Facebook group. Today we have a focus on leadership, volunteerism, resilience and recovery. And we've got a wonderful guest today, and I know you all know who we're going to speak to today because we've had such a massive uptick in our normal attendance. But to get us underway this morning and to sort of set the scene around the purpose of these webinars and the themes that we're going to talk about, it's my great pleasure to welcome back the brilliant Peter Kenyon from Bank of Ideas. Peter, where are you joining us this morning from?
Morning, Liz. Joining you from the very cold but stunningly beautiful remote outback town in WA called Mount Magnet. It is a great place to be back in, and it's just great to be here working with local people, and particularly with the GRAMS organisation, the local Indigenous Health Service, who are really organising some amazing stuff out here and really becoming a catalyst to engage local people in the future of their community. This morning, as Lindsay said, we're talking about this whole area of leadership and kind of like resilience. Just want to recap that really we see there's only 4 simple building blocks to making that great town. And over these webinars, we're attempting to drill into each of them. And today, particularly the whole issue of leadership, but I'm sure Shane's going to talk a lot about mindset. We've talked about healthy community building practices, and today particularly the whole issue of volunteerism. How do you recruit volunteers, but even more important, how do you keep volunteers? And obviously we've been talking about a whole pile of the economic development stuff, but that whole issue of leadership, and particularly today, these are some of the themes that we want to talk about. We particularly today want to talk about how do we not keep seeing young people as so-called leaders of tomorrow. How do we see them as part of the leadership today? And in particular, how do we empower them to do really serious things within their particular community? In terms of the critical leadership roles, and these are things that I'd be particularly wanting to tease out of Shane today, we see that these are the type of roles that are just so important for a community leader to kind of like fulfill. Now, before we have Shane, can I just share one little small town story? Emma is probably one of my greatest inspiring leaders from a country town, and it's out of a little town on the west coast of New Zealand called Granity. And I only met Emma 2 years ago. We've become great friends, but her story has kind of like inspired me and inspired many other people. And I just want to start with it. Just take 3 or 4 minutes to tell Emma's story. We're running a workshop for community builders in the regional town of Westport, and Emma came, and she was one of those people in the front row of the tables, and boy, was she into it. And when we got into the lunch break, she made a beeline for me, and we'd been talking all morning about, as leaders, the critical thing is to find what people care about. Start with what people care about. That's their motivation to want to get involved, and therefore map what people care about. And she turned up and said, Peter, do you want to know what I care about? What I really care about is good food, good coffee, and good conversation. But believe it or not, in my little town of 200 people called Granity, those 3 things are not possible. We had a coffee shop until about 18 months ago, and nowhere can you get decent food, decent coffee, and above all, have a good conversation with locals. That's what I care about. I thought, wow, that's great, Emma. What are you doing about that? What are you thinking about doing? She said, well, you know, I'd love to see those things happen. But then she said, don't look at me to make it happen. She said, I need to say I'm here today because I suffer from a mental health challenge. I've in fact just spent 2 weeks in hospital because of my depression. I'm not a leader. I'm not the person you need to do it. I said, maybe you are that person. She said, no. She said, I went on my town Facebook. I tried to share my story with people, and now I'm referred to as simply kind of like that nutter in the town. And so, no, I'm not the person. And she said, secondly, I also have a second problem in my life, and that's the guy with me, my husband. He's the local copper. And really, again, that often divides us with kind of like with the town, in the sense that many people are in that town for other reasons that my husband's often interested in. I said, you know what, Emma, maybe there are a whole pile of other people like you who care about good coffee, good food, good conversation. Maybe you need to get together with those people. Anyway, at the end of the workshop, we farewelled and whatever. But that night, I got a text message, and she said, you know what, I've decided to take the leap and develop my wings on the way down. What a wonderful quote. And she said, I've immediately kind of like emailed out to people the whole thought of coming to what she called community on Friday. She said, I've emailed out to that Facebook that was so negative about me, and I said I'm going to put on the best cake. I've got at least 4 varieties of coffee, 7 varieties of tea. Come together and let's talk about how we might do this as a regular kind of like event. And it's going to be held at the back of the police station. I'm sure most of you have always wanted to know what goes on there. And that morning, only 2 days after that workshop, 9 people turned up to talk about how they might create a community. She had her ingredients for a good conversation. And I love kind of like the use of things like this. She brought people together for a serious conversation about what she thought could make a real difference in that particular community. One of the first things she did was to engage in an asset map and said, if we want to set up a community cafe, what are the resources we've got locally? What are those head gifts? Everyone knows something about something. How could that be related to the coffee? Our heart gifts, our kind of like hand gifts. And you can see out of 9 people, what people were willing to share to kind of like brought that whole thing together. And within a week, a group of 21 people came together for the first community within that town. In a community of 200, 21 kind of like came together. In that second week, there were then 29. The third week, they're up to 31. The fourth week, they're up to 71. And now, 12 months on, somewhere between 60 and 90 people gather every Friday morning to come together as community around good cake and good conversation. It has become the heart of the community. It's become where people come together to kind of like discover and share with each other. It's not any kind of like community cafe. They have found decent tablecloths, there's flowers. They've turned this thing into something where people just want to be. It also isn't kind of like your average cafe. Boy, do they have an amazing menu. They have people on a roster. Once a month, you kind of like contribute and whatever. And wow, what they actually turn up with. They have special events, Mad Hatter Days and whatever. And they're drawing together every week between a third and a half of that particular community. And then they discovered other people saying, well, look, I've got the gift of music. I wonder whether you'd appreciate some live music. Someone else said, I haven't practiced hairdressing for 10 years, and the nearest hairdresser to us is a good 40k a ride. There's a spare room I'm happy to do at just a very basic cost people's hair. And on average, 10 people a week have their hair done. People have come and decided to use as an opportunity to kind of like share their drama skills. And once a month, all the artists kind of like display their incredible stuff. This simple exercise has become the heart of the community. And it's an opportunity for people like the emergency services who sponsor it probably once every 3 months and gives them a chance to talk about, changing the batteries in your fire alarms. It's an opportunity for that policeman who was having trouble connecting to meet in a much more informal occasion, and he's there every week in terms of kind of like building new relationships. What all this is about is relationship building. They've started up that idea of sharing those who've got a lot of surplus, kind of like leave it for those who might be struggling in terms of food. And in terms of their simple kind of like gold coin donation each week, they've been able to also reach out and instigate a whole pile of things. I love to just share that story with you because to me, this is what leadership is all about. It's only just over a year old. It's, in fact, won the best community building project of communities on the West Coast. It's a thing that has made an incredible difference. And it came to one woman who challenged herself, someone who said because of certain health kind of like challenges in life, she didn't see herself as that leader. But when she stepped out and discovered other people, she became the catalyst. And Emma is just one of those inspiring community builders who's just done so much. I love an email that she sent me recently that just captured what this simple event has actually done to their community. And she talked about Colin and just the difference that has actually made. And in terms of Emma, one of the things that she really said, community has healed my heart. She hasn't worked full-time for 7 years. She's now taken on being the regional librarian for the West Coast, which is her profession, because of the confidence. And she says all the time, you know what, it was in getting involved in community, starting with what we had and not what we didn't have, starting with the half full bit of the glass, not the half empty bit of the glass. And to me, she is just one of those great examples of what we want to talk about today. Resilience, this is what Shane has been invited to talk about, to me, is that ability to kind of like spring back, recover, adjust from adversity, the unexpected and change. It's the ability to cope with whatever the world may throw at us. And to me, I am excited now to kind of like hear the insights of a person who I think has inspired a nation. Thanks, Lindsay.
Thanks so much for that great intro, Peter. We've had a fantastic couple of weeks on this series, and we've covered all sorts of topics that stem from those 4 key themes. So if you'd like to watch them, we can send you the link. They're all on the Rural Aid and the Bank of Ideas website. If you haven't had contact with Bank of Ideas in the past, might I suggest you reach out? They are a wealth of knowledge and resource in the space of community building and leadership. I've just thrown a poll up to ask the question, did you see the Australian Story episode on Shane Fitzsimmons? And about half of you have. I'm going to send the link at the end of this whole session to the YouTube on it, because it's pretty worthwhile watching. I hope Shane doesn't mind me saying that, but it's a pretty fantastic half hour. I'm just going to play you now a quick little 2 minutes by way of a fabulous little introduction that the ABC put together on their Facebook page.
It's indicative of volatile, dynamic, changing fire grounds, and people need to remain alert, be ready to act.
It was a black summer, and he provided a calmness to a world that was burning.
I'm certainly not comfortable with any hero tag or anything like that. I have been absolutely in awe of the collective effort of everyone that came together this fire season. Look, there's no doubt through high school, yes, I was mischievous, I was rebellious. There was a lot of mentoring. There was people to give you a clip around the ears when you were being a bit too cheeky or doing the wrong thing. But you were also empowered with some really serious and important things to do and to deliver on. I'm confident that I'm better for it. Otherwise, I could have certainly gone down a different path and ended up right off the rails. Very dangerous and volatile situation already down the south coast of New South Wales, and we're expecting that to increase as we see.
For someone who's so decisive and demonstrated such leadership, he's also incredibly compassionate, and that's why he has such a loyal following amongst the RFS volunteers.
Well done. Shane, really thinks of all the people within the Rural Fire Service as family. I think that comes through pretty strong. He wants to see everyone get home.
I could have rationalised all sorts of reasons why I wanted to stay, and I love the organisation, I love the people dearly. But it was also, without a doubt, the hardest decision to make, because the organisation's been a massive part of my life over 35 years.
Well, a big Rural Aid good morning to you, Shane Fitzsimmons, if you're able to on and join us.
Hearing me loud and clear?
Success! Welcome!
There you go. Well done.
Look, we're going to talk on a whole range of topics today. Of course, we're going to talk bushfires, we're going to talk recovery, we're going to talk leadership and volunteerism, but this new organisation, newly created agency for the government, can you tell us a bit about your responsibilities there and what you're working on at the moment?
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay, and good morning, everybody. Resilience New South Wales is a new agency that the government put into effect from the 1st of May. So I've been in the role now about 6 weeks, and it's been a significant adaptation and lots of learning and lots of listening and hearing the views and opinions of what resilience means. Resilience New South Wales means to all manner of different people, whether it's other areas of government, whether it's some of the communities I've been visiting, local government and other stakeholders, businesses, industry, et cetera, But effectively, Resilience New South Wales is the government's lead agency for all manner of disaster preparation, planning, response, and importantly, the recovery effort and the rebuilding effort post major disasters, emergencies, or disruptions. And it's not just around natural disasters like bushfires, floods, and storms, and droughts, and those sorts of things, but it is also those human-induced challenges like cybercrime and what have you that can have an increasingly serious implication for how we operate and how we function. So a small agency, it's an executive agency in the area of Premier and Cabinet, reporting to the Premier, but also reporting to the Minister for Emergency Services on a number of things, and our Deputy Premier, who's got the role of leading the bushfire recovery efforts here in New South Wales. Importantly, and as I'm learning in my 6 weeks, I don't want to become Resilience New South Wales, become the dumping ground for every problem that people want to tag as resilience. But there's also a lot of extraordinary work that's going on across government and partnering with key areas, particularly around service delivery areas like regional New South Wales and primary industries in New South Wales, but also our infrastructure teams and what have you. It's also about connecting with the Commonwealth and how the state interacts with the Commonwealth on disaster preparedness, planning, mitigation and prevention activities, but also the response and recovery efforts. And it's connecting right down through to local government, local communities, local industry businesses, et cetera. So it's actually about a very broad remit. And as they said to me, taking on the role initially, which was certainly part of the attraction with the unprecedented and challenging seasons we've had with drought, with bushfires, with storms and floods, and now the broader implications of COVID. The three biggest priorities were recovery. And whilst we've seen unprecedented disasters unfold and all sorts of impacts and dislocations and implications for areas right across New South Wales and further afield, so too has that been matched with an unprecedented level of support and assistance and a range of packages and proposals to try and help people rebuild and recover, many of whom have not just been affected by one of these disasters or these disruptions. Many people have been affected by, 2, 3, or all 4 in New South Wales for that matter. So very much about rebuilding and replacing things, roads, bridges, buildings, fencing, all those sorts of things. But so important, underpinning all of that is the psychological and emotional well-being of people. And we are very aware of the extraordinary challenges and the wide-reaching challenges about how everyone has been affected individually, family, community, business, those sorts of things. So it's a fairly broad remit and we're still finding our way.
Shane, how will your organisation working with New South Wales Health?
Yeah, so we've already worked in very closely with New South Wales Health and everything from the response effort, and even looking at COVID right now, we've been part of the partnering with the state's committee around the COVID response and all the implications, and particularly with Resilience New South Wales around recovery and rebuilding. It's being part of the team that looks at those things, particularly the easing of restrictions and conditions, where communities, are desperate to see things get switched back on in order to effectively function and have social cohesion and integration and livelihoods and self-worth and matter. So making sure we get the balance right between the medical advice and the want to pursue and try and limit or eradicate the virus, but also the societal function and the economic rebounding and good economic rebounding and recovery also equates to good well-being and good social, community, individual, collective mental health and well-being, sense of purpose, sense of inclusion, sense of belonging. So very much involved in all of that, and also I've been asked, and I'm part of now, the New South Wales Task Force on Mental Health. So we're looking very much about what are the programs, what are the tools, and what are the resources to help reach out and connect with people that are doing it tough. And some people are doing it a lot tougher than others. But how can we make sure the services are tailored and nuanced into the different areas for different people to help them on this extraordinary journey of recovery and rebuilding?
Shane, can you share with us what you see a resilient small town looks like, acts like, feels like? I mean, what people tend to love to use that term to describe themselves as healthy, resilient, sustainable enterprise. What do you mean when you use that term, a resilient community?
And it's a good question, Peter, because the thing that I've learned in my first few weeks is that when they said to me, we're going to create a Department of Resilience, I said, what's this? Why call it resilience? Why not call it emergency management and recovery if that's the focus? Well, in my first 6 weeks, I've learned a lot that people really resonate with the word resilience. But what the challenge is, it means so many different things to so many different people. But at the core of it, it's about how do we operate and function as community and as local places, local areas. But if you look at the definition of resilience in the emergency management disruption, despair sort of circumstances, it's actually about having the ability to contemplate and articulate what sort of stresses or pressures or disruptions are we likely to encounter. So if we look at local areas, there's areas that are very familiar with flood, there's areas that are very familiar with bushfire risk, and they know they're going to get storms, and then you've got the other sort of left field challenges that have really broad implications like COVID's. So when we're sitting down and asking ourselves what sort of things will impact the way we operate and live, and whether it's anything from drought to bushfires to floods to storms to a major outage of power or connectivity, what does it mean? How are we going to operate? So people being able to contemplate what those sorts of disruptions might be, but then most importantly, planning and understanding what are the things that they can do individually and collectively to better withstand those impacts. So what sort of things can they do to prevent them? What sort of things can they do to mitigate against their exit? So when they happen, then what are they going to do in the event that they happen? How do they respond? And then depending on the scale of the disruption or the damage or the dislocation, how do they pull together and start rebuilding and recovering from that? And there's a real challenge, particularly in rural and regional areas. I think most people would agree that rural Australia, rural New South Wales, is in many ways more resilient and more adept at understanding and contemplating disruption and stressful and challenging times. So they're used to periods of needing to be dependent on, not relying on power supply, not relying on mains water supply, having things like generators and backup communications like CB radios and things like that. So there's an inherent level of resilience in rural and regional areas because they're used to, over the generations, of things not being outside the front door or just around the corner to go and pick something up or expect that it's going to be functioning, operating all the time. But I would caution that assumption about how resilient and prepared rural and regional areas are only in the context of that doesn't make them superhuman. They're ordinary people, extraordinary people working through really challenging and unique circumstances, and they still get affected. They still get emotionally affected. They still get challenged. And when you see people, dealing with drought, then with bushfires, then a storm, and then COVID, you've got to ask yourself how much can an individual take? How much can a family take? How much can a local community take? So because they're instinctively and inherently resilient, doesn't make them bulletproof to the challenges and the despair that comes with building those resilience. So really at a community level, it's actually about understanding neighbours, understanding colleagues, who in the community you can partner with and work with to contemplate the sorts of disruptions, share and learn knowledge and experience on how to get through these sorts of things, but also to be able to prosecute arguments and cases for getting support and assistance in building up mitigants and resilience to better withstand those impacts and, most importantly, rebound once they've occurred. So social inclusion and cohesion through your neighbours and through your local community becomes really, really important. And the best response efforts and the best recovery efforts are all those that are locally led, but enabled and endorsed and supported by outside assistance.
Shane, we had a great question come through from Toby, and it probably links to that sense of community that you're talking about. And his question is, how challenging is it for your organisation with COVID, drought, bushfires to ensure that everyone gets the assistance that they need? And you and I had a discussion about this the other day. We've got a large number of primary producers who have joined us on today's Community Builders session with you as our guest. They are stereotypically a sector that are really hard to get the right support to because of a whole bunch of characteristics, I guess, humble, proud, resilient in themselves. What do you think your organisation needs to do, or we need to do as communities, to ensure that the right people get the help they need?
Well, and that's a really important question, Lindsay. And I've got to say, as someone who was very close to the firefighting effort in New South Wales, over the 6 months that it was occurring, when I stepped in to take on this role, even when I was the fire commissioner and now with this role, I struggled as someone who was close to all that was happening to truly appreciate what were the suite of support packages, assistance measures, funding grants, and all those sorts of things that were available to people affected by the fires. Now, if someone like me who's pretty close to the decisions and the announcements of government and what they're targeting, how does a poor old punter out there in the community even begin to comprehend or navigate that maze? So we've worked very closely with local recovery committees, particularly those that are community-led, local government-led, targeting different areas, and starting to put together the suite of packages and assistance measures that are available. We know inherently, as you say, Lindsay, there's those inherent characteristics of people that are proud, who don't want to ever be viewed as someone that needs a handout or a leg up to do what they're doing. They've been independent for a long time. They'll work through this no matter what. We've got to get to those people and let them know that it's okay not to be okay, given the extraordinary circumstances, the unprecedented circumstances that we've all been experiencing, but also that there is no shame, that there is legitimate, significant assistance measures that are available to help people through and help people make decisions and progress to the next step in their recovery and rebuilding. We've been connecting with, I think in New South Wales, the last time I looked at the register of people that we're working with across fire-affected areas alone, we were well and truly up over 10,000 people. Now, we know there are still people in the community that are being challenged. So we've embarked on what we're calling a bit of an outreach program, where we are now seeking to make connections with anybody that we've had linkages with, reconnect with them, check how they're going, where they're up to, just go through with them what are the other things that might be available that they're not aware of, given their circumstances, that might also be able to generate that sort of assistance. And we've also been very public through media releases and other things that if anyone is aware of someone in their community, a neighbour, a friend, a family, colleague, whatever, please let us know so we can reach out and make connection with them. The other thing that we've observed this season and with previous events, of course, is that the one thing that really deters people putting their hand out, making connections to try and get assistance, is that every time they make a connection with somebody, they've got to retell their story, or they're talking to another person to go over it again. So that just infuriates them or frustrates them. So through this reach out program, we're looking at more of a case management. So Shane, if I'm ringing in for some assistance and I make connection with Lindsay, then the next time I make connection, it's going to be with Lindsay. So I've got this relationship going now that can save me that pain of having to explain every time and justify why I'm ringing. So we are very aware, but we rely on community to help us get to those people who may not be reaching out as much as we want to. We visit some people and they simply don't want assistance. They flatly refuse to take anything, but we will continue to revisit and just check how they're going and see if they change their mind.
Shane, want to talk a bit about leadership now, and obviously people have been in awe of the type of leadership you personally provided. I wonder whether you just reflect on, firstly, what you see is the roles of leadership within our rural communities. And then secondly, I'm passionate about how we include young people. And I love that particular clip that we saw earlier where you talked about young people being empowered to do serious things. I find so many communities want to talk about young people as the leaders of tomorrow and whatever, as if they're parked there to be just a recipient of what they're doing. But how do we engage young people as early as possible? You were elected a fire captain at 19. It's absolutely amazing. How do we actually open doors and windows more for our young people to step up within their communities? Following on from what you see as the role of leadership in a rural community.
Oh, Peter, I could talk all day on this question, and I'll share some stories. So when I joined the brigade, my dad was in the organisation, and he was the captain at the time. And I remember at the time he was criticised a bit from his fellow captains, and we were known as the kindergarten brigade because there was a lot of younger people that were coming in. And once you get one or two young people that join into a volunteer organisation, they will tend to talk to their mates, to their colleagues, and say, yes, this is a place where we can do something, we can hang out and have a bit of fun. There's a meaningful and purposeful role for us to undertake. We're making a difference in the community. But what I also found as a young fella, and I was, as the video clip indicated there, and I don't recall seeing that one, I was quite wayward. I wasn't very good with school. I was expelled from all sorts of things. I was disciplined all the time. I was quite rebellious. But what I found in the volunteer organisation was there was a sense of belonging. There was mentors and guides, and they would give you a good clip around the ear if you were doing the wrong thing. And whilst we might not do that today, there's different ways of providing that mentoring, that guidance, that leadership that young people are looking for. But young people will not stay around if they're not given responsibility or they're not respected for what they bring and what they offer. I know when I was in the RFS for a long time, I cannot tell you how many forums I went to where the young members would come and approach me and say, Shane, we love these older members, but they just won't accept us. There's nothing for us to do. They're never interested in giving us a role of leadership or some responsibility. And then I'd talk to the same area and I'd speak to the senior captains or group captains, and the most common message was, Shane, these young ones, they're just not interested in taking on any responsibility. They're not ready for the new role yet. So what you would find invariably in local areas, the young ones really wanted to get in. The older ones wanted the young ones in, but they weren't working out how to connect and overlay that interaction. And the most notable example was I would speak to senior officers who would often be the group captain of the organisation, the local organisation. They'd also be the captain. They'd then be the permit issuing officer. So they'd take on all these roles, and they would say to me, "Oh, they're not interested in taking on these roles." I said, "Vacate one or two of them, and see what happens." "Oh, no one will put their hand up," they'd say. I say, "Do me a favour, create the vacancy, and see what happens." Because when you talk to the young ones, they will turn around and say, "Well, we're never going to get a chance in this organisation, Shane, until these old buggers move on." And then the young ones also say, they've been around for such a long time, we don't want to start coming in and kicking them out of their role because they've got too much respect for the wisdom, the experience, and the role and the function that these people have held in the organisation. So creating this link and introducing the two groups together and having that conversation is really, really important. And over the last couple of decades in the RFS, we did embark on a number of things. We started doing some cadet programs in rural areas particularly, and we started out with only a handful of schools. Local volunteers would help run a program, 10 weeks, and it was basic introduction to firefighting. There was some community work, the value of volunteering in community, et cetera, et cetera. We're now graduating, I think, more than 800, 900 kids a year from high schools around New South Wales. The important thing was that it started out as EOIs for kids to participate, and they did it in lieu of sport or something else. But what we also find now is schools are getting their young people, particularly those young people that are a little bit disaffected. They're not academically, 100%. They're not the best, drama person. They're not the next Nicole Kidman or Hugh Jackman. They're not the best, sports person in the school. but when they bring them together and they put them in this team of cadets working through things, they find the basic life skills start coming through: teamwork, decision-making, communication, adaptation, agility, decisiveness. So there was lots of life skills that started to happen. And then what they found was kids that weren't fitting in suddenly had a new peer group and had a new sense of belonging and purpose. And we found it really challenging to keep up with that program. We also developed a young members group in the RFS as well. At the organisation, between the ages of 16 and 24 is about 8,500 young members. Don't let anybody in your community tell you that young people are not interested in volunteering. I call rubbish on those sentiments all the time. Young people do want to volunteer, but they want to volunteer in something where they're respected, there's a sense of belonging, and they can contribute meaningfully to that local community. And I would challenge anybody to think about anything in their local community that works well, and you'll find it's underpinned by volunteers, whether it's care, healthcare, whether it's a school and education, whether it's sports and getting people to sports and kids sports, whether it's fire and emergency services, of course, everything at local community level that works well, service clubs and the whole thing, is all underpinned by volunteers. The challenge is the model of yesterday in membership is not the model we rely on today, and it's certainly not going to be the model we rely on tomorrow. Another classic example to grow membership and diversification is to ensure that we meaningfully and equally value women and we value young people when it comes to getting into our traditional organisations. And I'll just bore you with another example. Many years ago, we did some surveys out in central west New South Wales. We surveyed our members who said they were struggling getting new members, and they saw themselves as an open, inclusive, welcoming organisation. We then surveyed the local communities of those same brigades, independent of members, and the community came back and said the opposite, that they weren't open, they weren't inclusive, they weren't welcoming. As a matter of fact, they saw them the equivalent of a local men's shed, that you had to be in a clique to be part of it, and unless you were part of the old guard, you were never going to get anywhere. So we had this very internal-facing view, which was in stark contrast to how the community viewed the receptiveness of that organisation to new membership, to new ways of doing things. We also saw across the organisation traditional brigades in the firefighting versus the old support units, which were catering and communications and logistics. And being very stereotypical, the men were generally in the firefighting brigades and the women were in the support units. So about a decade or so ago, when I first became commissioner, we went on a flexible membership model and we equalised the status of all the brigades. So they're all core brigades. They all elect leadership positions. They all elect captains and senior deputy captains and captains and deputy captains. And it's amazing within the first few years how quickly women were moving into the firefighting brigades, and most notably, suddenly, because we were recognising logistics, catering, comms and all those other support areas as formal brigades, as part of the workforce that helps support and make sure firefighters are safe and effective as possible. It's amazing how many men moved into the traditional support roles because we were now recognising them as equal amongst the brigade structure. The other thing we did to help with a lot of the older members, because part of being the captain or the group captain for such a long time becomes very much part of their social identity. So we also embarked on what we called a retired group officers program, or a senior volunteers program, where someone who was been in the role for a long time and was certainly aging, still very much regarded their status, their uniform, their belonging to that organisation. But we created a volunteer position, a retired position for volunteers, with the endorsement of their colleagues. If they were worthy of that position, they could step into that and simply be a mentor and not have to have all the operational burden and responsibility. And by vacating those senior roles, you ended up with a big cascading effect of more vacancies and movements opening up, which meant there were opportunities for young people and other people to start moving in and doing things without having to move on in an unpleasant way, those that have been there for a long time.
Shane, many people focus on recruiting more volunteers, but the evidence is retaining volunteers is probably much more important. Any tips on how do you keep people interested? How do you keep people going for the long haul? How do you keep people excited about what our organisations and our small towns are trying to do?
Well, there's a couple of things to that, I think, Peter. There's many things to that, but one of the core things we found in the RFS, and businesses find this when they survey personnel, and particularly personnel that leave, values and behaviours are really important in any organisation, and particularly in volunteer organisations. So when you agree to some basic values around, and the RFS were pretty simple values. It was things like mutual respect, teamwork, appropriate behaviour, training and professionalism, all those sorts of things. As much as you focus on recruitment and retention, you've also got to focus on dealing with inappropriate, unacceptable behaviour, changing that behaviour, changing the people, or getting rid of them out of the organisation if you want to ensure that you're going to be an organisation of choice, an organisation that genuinely values inclusion and equality in membership. So retention is very much underpinned by, are we true to our values, and is it a place where people feel valued, included, connected, and respected? Because if there's inappropriate behaviour, or if there's a dominant, set of characters that just don't give way to anybody, and they end up having, bullying and intimidation and those sorts of things, then you're never going to get more people to come in. So in actual fact, you either change their behaviours or you change them and ask them to go and be part of something else where they might be better suited. So around the retention, it's also about making sure we constantly engage. And I do remember, ironically, in the RFS, we would always seek to feedback on positions, on policies, on whatever, and the amount of people that said, we're sick of being engaged with. But the reality is, the biggest complaint of a volunteer organisation is if they're not seen to be part of their destiny, part of their daily work, then they will resent not being valued and appreciated for what they've got to offer. So making sure we constantly adapt and adjust to societal expectations, to changing circumstances in our role. It's no different to the way farmers have had to adjust practices and procedures around people, around business practices, around operations. The same's got to happen to volunteer organisations. The model of yesterday and the foundations of where we start have to absolutely be admired, respected and captured, and often revered and regarded. But we've got to adapt and adjust and change. And I think the old Darwinian quote is, the survival of a volunteer organisation or an entity, like the survival of a species, it's not about the biggest and the best and the greatest profile or anything like that. It's about one's ability to adapt to change in order to survive. And I think a lot of volunteer organisations need to nurture and appreciate their past, but they need to embrace and move forward with new ideas, new initiatives, new insights. And you're only going to get that through new perspectives and new members and members of different types than might have been the tradition there. You need your local membership to be reflective of your local community.
Really good.
Hello.
Shane, we had a question emailed through that I sent to you this morning from the community of Leadville, and two organisations, both with a really clear charter. One organisation that's been running the local hall for a long time. It's had a fantastic grant come through that they've refurbished the building with. They've got their own ambitions and endeavours with that. There's also a new organisation in town that are focused on the business and commercial part of the town going forward. The two need to work together. They have somewhat differing opinions and different sort of diversity mixtures in their leadership groups. What do you say to organisations that are facing that challenge, or communities where there's several groups and leadership organisations with different agendas?
And look, that's a real challenge in everything we do. But I did see that note from Leadville, and look, the real challenge is make sure that we engage the community and deliver, the best way for that, how can we best serve the community whilst the group has got the donations and best serve their needs. And how can we then, pull that together to be of greater benefit and greater importance to the local community? And that's about negotiation. It's about mutual respect. It's about honest, authentic conversations. It's actually about compromise and adapting what we might have initially thought, to still achieve the end result, but maybe a result that's improved or enhanced to what was initially going to be there. And in relation to that note, I did see an indication there whether I'd be happy to come up and visit and see the development and the work. And the simple answer is yes. Feel free to get in contact with me. I've visited Leadville a few times, particularly with the local brigade up there when we had the awful fires a few years ago, back in February 17. A wonderful, lovely little community up there to the east of Dunedoo, and I'd be more than happy to go back for a visit and catch up with the locals. I know some of the local volunteer members pretty well there, and I met some of the local community, and to see progress in the town would be wonderful, and I'd love to get up and be part of that.
We just lost a sound a little bit with you a moment ago, Shane. So we just lost a few of your early comments on organisations working together. If you want to just kind of summarise that down to a sentence, I'll leave my mic on because I think that's what's distorted it.
Organisations working together is really important. Understanding what the grant was, what it was intended to do, but is there opportunity to do more with that? Other organisations might be able to add to the bucket. You could deliver something greater for the greater good of that local community through collaboration, compromise, and bolstering efforts together.
Shane, I wanted to share with you a letter that Rural Aid received. I've made it anonymous, but I've just shared it with everyone in the group too. And for me, it just captures the dual challenges that our primary producers have faced for so long. And I'll read as quickly as I can through it, but it's a bit of a sentiment warning on this one. So it's a letter to the assisters and aiders at Rural Aids. I'm writing to express my heartfelt gratitude to you and your organisation for the assistance you freely provided me when I was beset by both drought and bushfires. No doubt you've heard plenty of stories like mine, but I just wanted to make sure my appreciation for your generosity is put on the record. I like to think of myself as a person who never puts his hand out, who pays his own way, who bobs back to the surface pretty quickly without the need for a flotation device. But this relentless drought and the onslaught of 3 bushfires finally convinced me that I could no more afford that sort of pride than I can afford any more fodder. It was quite daunting when you realise that working harder and longer won't save your cattle. What's more, it hurts when you feel that you let your family down by not preparing better, managing better, or just selling the stock earlier. Then there's the feeling that you've let your cattle down if all you can offer them is a bullet. I feel like if there was any ever chance I was going to crack up, there was going to be the chance that I was going to crack up, but my prevailing vibe seemed to be a combination of disbelief and calm desperation. This individual is also the group captain of the New South Wales Rural Fire Service, and right in the midst of fires affecting the area he was responsible for, his neighbour was killed by a bushfire, and the bushfire burned out a part of his own property for a period of 6 weeks. When he felt he should have been his group captain of his local rural fire service, he was in fact stopping fires on his own properties and 2 more nearby that were threatening the properties around him. Eventually, he rejoined the fray, but said that it really hurt to be out for so long, which I think captures that sense of volunteerism so beautifully there. He said, of course, it was my wife who persuaded me to apply for the help of Rural Aid. Wisely, she avoided the don't be so stubborn approach. It was more a matter of we need this now. Your straightforward application, he writes to Rural Aid, the process made it so easy for us to get the ball rolling. Did it solve our problems? Of course, not all of them, but it helped us catch our breath. I hope that in some way, sometime, we will be able to treat people the way that you have treated us, Rural Aid. And I thought it was a beautiful sentiment to capture what Rural Aid does, but also a great example of the resilience of our farmers and how they often will leave it so late before they reach out, if they reach out at all.
Oh, look, that's a beautiful note on so many levels, Lindsay, and I can see that playing out in a number of areas and a number of interactions that I've had across New South Wales over the years that I've been that I've been connecting and visiting places, and particularly during times of, awful fire seasons and other devastating events affecting local communities. I think the thing that really gets to me in so much of the connectedness with rural and regional areas is actually catching up with the wives and partners. They're often the ones that will speak out with some anonymity and say, I really worry about my husband. I really worry about the load that he carries on his shoulders, that he shouldn't. There's this real sense of failure if they can't get through it on their own. Is there some way you can connect with them and get to them and let them know that it's okay to put a hand up? I think the other thing that came through in that letter about the group captain and feeling guilty, it underpins absolutely rural folk, regional folk. It underpins that commitment to volunteering, which is so powerful, which is so persuasive, and that is a genuine love and concern for their country, for their neighbours, for their colleagues in the organisation, and the sense in any way of letting them down really cuts deep to their psyche, to their sense of belonging, to their sense of inclusion in that local community. And I've spoken to some volunteers, I've spoken to senior volunteers in captains and group officers roles where they had to spend time protecting their own property, saving their own stock, saving as much as they could on their property, with the support of local brigades or visiting brigades, but then they felt guilty because they weren't locking in and spending time with their colleagues looking after their own property. So it's not an unusual sense of conflicting psychology that goes on in the mindset, but what it does do is it just reinforces that how strong and how powerful this sense of community is. And there's something very powerful and very critical about connecting with local community influencers and leaders, not necessarily in the fire service or anywhere else, but who are they and how do we reach out to people? And for people like me in leadership roles and people like Rural Aid doing what they're doing, being very open about the real issues and stresses and the emotional toll that despair and devastation has on us as individuals, has on us as families and as local communities, helps normalise the discussion. Because I grew up in an era where blokes, didn't admit or concede vulnerabilities. We saw all sorts of horrific and tragic circumstances, and the amount of times that you're just told to wipe away the tears and move on, get ready for the next one. The world has changed, and we also need to normalise that and understand that you don't get through these things in isolation. You get through it with the love and support of family, of neighbours, of great mates, and of local community. And the other thing I would pick up on that letter too to Rural Aid, disasters, devastation, despair, whilst it brings people to their knees and the very worst of circumstances can often end up eventuating with suicide and what have you. What the flip side to that is, it also brings out the very best in people, in society, in humanity, with a care and support and a willingness and a want to contribute. And Rural Aid is a really good example of that, with the energy of donations and support getting out to people, and the ability for Rural Aid and the community to market the impact that people's generosity, that people's donation makes on the ground is really important and really powerful, because it absolutely highlights and tells the story that people reluctantly are accepting help, but it's not about greed. It's not about people just putting their hand out. People are getting this assistance because they desperately need it, and it is making life differences to individuals, to families, to children, to businesses, to whether someone's got to destroy the remaining stock, the herd that they've got or whatever, or whether they can repair this and repair that, or have another go at something. It makes a real difference in the lives and livelihoods of individuals and of broader communities. That's a very, very powerful letter that should be shared with as many people as possible. It embodies the challenges, but also the significant difference that that agencies like Rural Aid actually make to people on the ground.
Well, Shane, we want to thank you so much for your time today. As a proud New South Wales woman, I'm delighted that you're heading up this fabulous new organisation, that you're bringing the leadership that you have for all of us this morning and sharing your very candid thoughts on the roles of leadership and the responsibility we all need to take in our rural communities. We've had some great comments come through here about resilience and it not being about just being strong. It's about accepting change and being open to help as part of facilitating that change. You've generated some huge comments down here on the side of our chat function here today. You made a comment a moment ago about the emotional toll and the mental toll that major catastrophic changes like drought, bushfire, flood, COVID will have on rural and regional individuals. It would be remiss of me not to mention that about once a month Rural Aid host a session called On the Couch, very similar to this, except that the chat is private. We limit it and people can write their questions directly to counsellors anonymously, and we discuss all sorts of topics. Last week we discussed the topic of overwhelm and it was really well received. We've really enjoyed having you on today on behalf of Rural Aid and Bank of Ideas, and thank you for taking all of our questions. Next week on the program we're going to have the wonderful Jen Donovan, who is the brains behind the Buy from the Bush campaign, which was a tiny idea with a fantastic social media presence behind it that went absolutely national and now has 250,000 Australians supporting it. So we hope to see you all next week. You'll all get an automatic reminder. We'll send you a bunch of handouts on today and the video session as well. But once again, a big thank you to you, Commissioner Shane Fitzsimmons, for your time today, and all the very best with Resilience New South Wales.
Thanks, Lindsay. It's been an absolute pleasure to join you, and congratulations to you and all of Rural Aid for what you're doing, what you've done and what you're doing, and what I know you'll continue to do into the future. It's making a genuine and sincere difference to the lives and livelihoods of many people right across Australia who really need it right now.